Hi, I'm Kath, and this is a series of conversations about things that I think are really important with a bunch of people that I'm inspired by, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I enjoyed having them.
Hello world, my name is Flex. I am 26 and I'm a professional opinion haver. I am an Aries sun, an Aquarius moon, and a Pisces rising. I want to say I prefer a dog around. Like there's definitely more variation of vibe. I feel like you can get a range of personalities, dispositions, heights, weights, tones. Cats to me feel really one-dimensional, but cats to me are closer to humans than dogs. I'm gonna go with exceeds all expectations.
Well, welcome to the show, Lillian, also known as Flex Mami on the internet.
That's me.
That is you. Your resume is quite an elaborate one. You're a DJ, a presenter, you have a podcast, you have several podcasts.
Three.
Three. You also have your own online store where you make DIY, well, you make DIY on the internet, but you make like homewares as well as the Reflex card game, which is like iconic. Champion of critical thinking and a pioneer for us to all facilitate our own nuts.
Amen.
On your elaborate resume, you also recently became Influencer of the Year, so congrats. And I just guess on that, I want to know what this award means to you and kind of like what your relationship is like with the internet.
I mean, fundamentally, the award means very little, but I do like to win, and I do like what it took to win that, because it wasn't like an industry reviewed or an industry nominated award. Like your peers had to nominate for you and vouch for you day after day after day after day after day. And then considering of the people nominated, I had the least amount of followers. I was like, this is sick. Like people ride for me. That feels better. Yeah. What's the award gonna do? Pay my bills? No. But
it's the Aries in you. Wait, there's Aries in you, right? Yeah. You like to win.
Just like to win for winning's sake.
And what's your relationship like with the internet? Like obviously, like you were saying, winning that award, you know, it's not necessarily about the award, it's about all you've done to, you know, achieve that. And I guess a lot of that has been creating content online. What is your relationship like with the internet?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I definitely think it's one of those things that's maybe more enjoyable than it is beneficial in the long run. I think that if I had to debate, I'd debate in favor of the internet. But it definitely has its downsides. And like as I age, the more I try and detach myself from it. Because like where I am now, like every touch point of my existence has the internet as a cross section. Like that's a very dangerous way to live, you know? And it's a very like externalized way to live, you know? And it's a very challenging thing to be like, I'm going to be an internal person. I'm not going to share stuff because it directly hurts your bag and it hurts your career trajectory and it hurts your lifestyle to a point. It hurts your connections, like not even career-wise, just interpersonal connections. Because I'm that girl who's like, I didn't look at my phone today. Sorry, I didn't respond to your text. You would get it as somebody who like whose life centers around the internet in like a very just practical way. Once you take time off and detach from it, it's a personal attack to everyone who can no longer contact you. So it's not just like I have the right to detach or turn off because of my mental health. It's like, you're really inaccessible. Yeah. And that's annoying.
And it's like this, I feel that it's like a constant pressure. And I also find, I think you were talking about before, like the not on your phone thing. It's like sometimes you don't want to be on your phone, but like sometimes that doesn't include being on the app because it's like your work. And then people are like, you didn't reply to my text, but you just like post on Instagram, like, it's different. Well, I guess on that, you seem to have really strong boundaries that you've established with like your online community. I think I've honestly, speaking of, you know, my own experience through watching you and the way you set boundaries, I think it's almost like for someone else that works, you know, sometimes on the internet, I feel like I've been able to take inspiration from that and be like, oh, I can like say no to these people. And I just want to know like how you manage those boundaries and expectations and kind of like execute that.
I didn't start using social media until I was building a brand. And so I had an account, but it was a ghost account made to stalk other people. So I was well aware of my relationship to people who had profiles online. Like they were very much 2D characters made for my entertainment. And I didn't really consider how that manifested until I was the 2D character made for somebody else's entertainment. And I realized, oh shit, like, you know, you can't speak to people in that way, and you can't just ask for things from a whole stranger. And it isn't appropriate to ask personal questions, even given the circumstance of someone putting out personal information. And so I think it started out as me resenting people who didn't realize that I was a whole person. And then it became like an exercise of harm reduction. Like I can't be angry every time I look at my phone. So I need to let people in on the discomfort. And it's a really powerful thing to let people know they're making you uncomfortable, because suddenly the energy shifts and it becomes a process of accountability. So if I'm talking about my skincare routine, and I'm like, hey, it's going really well, but don't ask me questions because I don't know about your skincare. It's like, oh shit, yeah, she's right. Like she doesn't know shit about my skin or me. Good looking out. Yeah. And then I'm not fielding 100 different messages being like, hi, I have acne prone skin and rosacea. What would you know? We're not doing that, you know. I can't. It's like multi-pronged though, because I'm already an assertive person. I'm already comfortable with expressing myself. And I feel quite confident in what I say and what I do. So all of those things layered makes me feel comfortable enough to set a boundary, because I feel like it's a sensible thing to do. But I feel like a lot of people don't have that infrastructure of assurance and feel like people are entitled to them, you know. And if you naturally feel that way, like I think a lot of people who make money on the internet think they're in a service-based industry. Like, I have to give you this experience because I am the content creator. It's like, no, this is a personal experience you're having and you're letting people see it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly, you know, they're a client for you. They're a voyeur. Should be secret silent voyeurs, but given the way of the world, suddenly they're interacting with you. And I think it's like, just almost like an exercise in knowing that nobody's going to know exactly how to engage with you. So the more you keep putting that framework up, the less pressure you put on yourself when things aren't really working as you intended it. Yeah. And because it works though, like once you set a boundary, like gosh, like it's so much easier.
Hey? And you're like, why didn't I do this so long ago? Just be like, actually, I'm not going to reply to my DMs.
Yeah. Or simply be like, I can't give you advice. I'm so sorry that I seem like someone who'd be able to give you insight, but I don't want to be liable for a decision that you make based on me having no context about your life. And suddenly you're like, oh shit, true. But then I also think that boundary setting is a very self-fulfilling thing. You know, like you do it for yourself in hopes that somebody's going to listen and fall in line, but also like people aren't going to do what you want just because you want it to. So setting boundaries is like the first step, and then you have to detach and be like, if I can't have people behave in a way that's functional for me in a practical, then I have to go. And then you just log off.
You love to encourage your audience to critically think, so much so that you made your own card game called the Reflex Game. It is described as a hilarious, thought-provoking conversation card game. Why do you think it's so important that people apply critical thinking into their day-to-day life or when moving in this crazy world?
I think people, that feels like a pregnant pause, but no, I'm just a really phlegmy bitch. I think people critically think all the time. Like it's just a matter of where you apply that. So you would critically think in the sense that, let's say you had to go work out, but you also wanted to wash your hair. So you'd be like, well, do I work out first, get sweaty, then wash my hair? Do I wash my hair, just tie it up and try not to sweat as much? It's the practice of, you know, being really considered and taking in all the information before you structure your thought and then make a decision. But yes, it's just a matter of when they do it, I think it needs work. The only reason why I made the game in particular was because people were reflecting on the fact that they liked the conversations I'd have with Bobo, who I make the podcast with, and they were kind of like, how do you come up with interesting questions? And I'm like, it's not an interesting question. You're just having a conversation and being engaged and asking the right questions for the answers you actually want to hear. So when they were asking for this kind of feedback, it's easy to be condescending and be like, it's really simple. Just be engaged when you speak to people. And that's rude. And so I was trying to figure out like what the dissonance is. Like, why do you not feel secure in just asking questions that you want to hear the answers to? And then I realized people wanted these questions for dates. And I was like, oh, I get it. Like, everybody's performing when they're on dates, and it's really hard to, you know, show up, be the most engaging person you can be, but also ask the right questions, but also have the right answers. And so initially, I would just write questions in my notes, and if somebody asked, I'd be like, here are some questions that you can take to your date, you know, or whatever you want to do, which is fine because it's fun. It's like the least I can do. It takes no time for me to write these questions, and it takes a lifetime of anguish for someone to not feel like they have the right tools to have a conversation. So then I would send it to anyone who asked, but then if our podcast has like 100,000 listeners and there's like thousands of people being like, can I get those questions? Can I get those questions? You're like, oh shit, like, sure. But then it's like, I already have those questions. You gave them to me last week. I want more questions. I'm like, okay, hold on. Like, excuse me. No. See, I was being sweet, and now I'm not going to do that anymore. So then it became almost like I think what was frustrating was that in my head, if I'm going to give you the starting tool, I would expect that you just take this and build on it, right? In the same way that if you're going to help somebody, you know, increase their perspective on something, or you're going to teach someone something, you give them the foundation and you're like, you now add onto it. And nobody was adding onto it. And I was like, there's no accountability. So now you think, I want fun questions, I'll just go to Flex, instead of being like, I want fun questions, I'll just think of them myself. And so I was like, there needs to be some sort of like transaction, because it was becoming like a one-sided transaction. And I was like, nah, babe, no. This isn't like, we're not philanthropists here, okay? Yeah. We live in a capitalist system, and I want to cash in. But yeah, so it was as simple as that. It was like, I was sick of feeling as though I was now going to be required to be giving insight and information. I was like, no, let's make this fun for me. I like graphic design, I like making stuff, I like selling stuff, I like making money, and I like people having the initiative to do things for themselves. So it's like, the tool is there, don't even come to me anymore. There's a whole website. You can go there and get all the answers you need. And so it's been really interesting, because I feel as though, I don't know, like with all the emphasis we have on like learning and like growing and self-development, a lot of us forget like the most fundamental things, you know? Like we just stay here regurgitating what we read on Twitter and not formulating thoughts and beliefs. Like, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it.
What are like, because obviously, yeah, you're like, you know, we all critically think, but it's kind of like, what are you critically thinking about? I guess like, if you could just like pick like, what do you wish, obviously we're generalizing here, but like, what do you wish people would critically think more about? Like, what do you think is like, I wish people would to think about that?
All of it. I would love people to think about just themselves. I think about people have fallen into the habit of thinking about themselves in a very voyeuristic way. Like, how do people see me? How am I perceived? Am I bubbly? Am I chill? Am I as tall as people think I am? Am I bigger? Am I small? It's like, why are you thinking from an outside lens in? It's like from the inside out. Like, where did you inherit all your beliefs from? Like, why do you care about certain things? Are you like your family members? Do you feel healthy inside? Do you know what your body feels like when it's well or unwell? And suddenly it's like cricket. But then when a Nicki Minaj song comes on, you can rap it word for word, and you know everything about her. It just is like a certain dissonance between like being an active participant in your own life and a passive one. Because suddenly when you actually are thinking about like the sums of your parts and the things that make you you and why you are the way you are, everything outside of it gets so much easier, because you're like, oh no, I get why I responded that way. Duh, makes sense. As opposed to being like, I'm so confused by everything. I don't know why I feel this way. I don't know why I think this way. Why are things? Like, even like fundamentally for perspective, right? So like, I'm like a glass half full type bitch.
I'm not.
Very interesting.
I'm like glass half empty all the time.
It changes my language. Yeah. I'll be like, everybody is so helpful. Why are like good things always happening? It's so crazy. Like, everything just works out. Like, but it's like, if I had no like context for that, then it'd be like, you'd be naive. But I'm also very pragmatic. So I don't really think that things work out. I'm actually working at things in a way that they should work out. And when they don't, I would sooner say, oh, I just didn't learn that thing well enough, as opposed to like, it just happened because things happen, right? But like, I have a lot of friends who believe that things don't happen for a reason and think the glass is half empty. So like, it's this constant feeling like the powers that be are working against you at all times. And that's not a wrong belief to have, but it definitely impacts more of that person's outlook than they would think. And so you have to start differentiating between like, well, what's in your head, what's your perspective, and what's your reality?
Like on that, do you think that whole notion of like glass half empty, glass half full, whatever, do you think that's like a product of kind of like your environment and maybe the way you've been brought up? Or do you think it's something that you need to like teach yourself, or like a bit of both?
It's definitely a bit of both, but I do believe that like how you're brought up really sets you up. Like, I think I was given my circumstance, like, you know how there are like external factors that you're not going to be able to change that'll impact you. So like your gender, your sexuality, your race, your socioeconomic status, all of these things you know that are going to be impacts on your life. You can't really change, but you can learn how they impact you. And then there's like the things that happened in your household. Like, my mum instilled such a sense of ego in me that I couldn't really unpack until I was older. She would tell me things, right? Like, if somebody's mean to you at school, they're just jealous. And you know why they're jealous? Because you're my daughter. You know what that means? It means you're great and you can do anything you want to do. And so if I'm hearing that as a kid, that's just fact to me. I didn't critically think that. I was like, hold on, Mum. Let's weigh up the pros and cons of that statement. Maybe you're biased, Mum. No, I was like, cool. I mean, why would she lie to me? It makes sense. Like, that's what. So, you know, with things like that, I can't separate a delusion from the truth, because in my formative years, that was my truth. But in your not yours, but in somebody else's formative years, if you really weren't given, you know, a good indication of a more positive way of thinking or any framework that gives you a sense of assurance, then like, you're pretty much fucked in the sense that it takes a lot of work for you to build that, you know, and I don't think, like, given the kind of society we live in, we're not given enough time to slow down and do the work that needs to be done. We do the busy work, you know, got to show up to work, got to have that conversation, got to quickly do this thing. So like, taking however many hours you need in a day to reprogram. I mean, and I get if you can't.
It's okay. Let's talk about masturbation, something a little bit more fun, and, or in your own words, facilitating your own nut. What provoked you to have these conversations publicly? You know, I think we're slowly seeing a change maybe in conversations around sex and women and genderqueer people, like sexual liberation, but I definitely think you're at the forefront of those conversations on the internet. And I just want to know, like, what provoked you to have those conversations publicly when they weren't really?
It was like multi-pronged, as all things are. I guess it was probably around the same, it was pre-Reflex, but it was definitely due to the podcast. I think that given any space on the internet that's set up to have discussions about things that matter, dating always becomes a priority. Because you're talking about philosophy and someone's like, but what about stoicism in dating? You're like, no dating. We're not talking about that shit. But so that was coming up a lot. And we used to do like Q&As and be like, no, what do you want us to talk about? What do you want to hear? And, you know, it would go into the dating territory. It was like very heterosexually centered. And the fact that, you know, men just are selfish and, you know, I didn't come because this guy was so focused on himself and because of him, and I was like, see, but if you just take him out of the equation, we're left with you. And do you know how to make yourself come? No? Oh, okay. Well, then suddenly we're having two different conversations. And suddenly all that energy we're putting onto berating a selfish lover, we can turn to the fact that you don't know your own anatomy. So like, let's start there. And the energy obviously shifted because it became one of accountability and not playing a blame game that was rooted in a lot of insecurity. I feel as though many like vulva havers aren't taught about what their pleasure is because like it's not been a priority, you know, and you can see a lot of us have like internalized a lot of really harmful beliefs about pleasure. Like, do you remember, like, I don't know about you, but I went to an all-girls school and like the height of embarrassment was somebody making up a rumor that you masturbated.
Yeah, right. I literally didn't think that women or genderqueer or whatever, people around me did that. Like until Lucinda, shout out to my wife, Lucinda, literally this is when we first were becoming really good friends and I was like in a room and her like vibrator was like next. I was like, what? She was like, what? And I was like,
you're like, what? It's odd, right? But it's not odd in the sense of like that's bad if you don't know, but it's just not ingrained in the rhetoric. It's not in the conversation. You could be 14 talking about how to give gobbies and not give your first one for 5 years, you know. But no one's talking about pleasure in a way that like actually resonates. Like I remember I was like 18 and I was watching some rom-com with like I don't know, like I don't know what their names are, Sarah Jessica Parker, maybe, some miscellaneous woman. And then I was like watching this show, I'm like, okay, so like imagine a camera, it's like a bird's eye view, and she's like lying in bed with the covers up, and then she puts her hand, I'm like, where's her hand going? What is she doing down there? And then she's making these faces. I'm like, Reddit, Sarah Jessica Parker, movie scene. What the fuck is this? I was like, oh, is that, interesting.
Yeah, but it's so weird because then you also hear people that are like everyone's stories, because then you hear somebody like, yeah, like I was on a bike and I was like,
yeah, I was 3 years old.
I don't have any of those memories.
I was 7 years old. Yeah. I found an armchair. And then I straddled the armchair and I was like, rub. And then it felt so good. And then I knew, and then my dad came in, he was like, don't do that. And I was like, why not?
Yeah. And what? I was like, who?
What? So yeah, and because I guess I'd never been like, I'm not someone who gets very embarrassed to talk about things. I'm not afraid to look or seem dumb because I'm always trying to learn. So I would have been that person in high school who would be like, Miss, I don't understand when it's like 2 minutes to go and the class is wrapping up. Like anyone, and like Lil, I'm like, I don't get it though. They're like, shut up. So to me, I was just Googling things and be like, fuck, did you know that the clit's not just the button? It's like all the way down the sides and you can reach from the back. Like that's me being like, you guys knew this? You didn't, you don't know this. Interesting. And then all these people that I would talk to would be like, orgasm? No, like, I don't do that. I'm like, but you, like, do you want to? Ew, no. I'm like, this is interesting. And so it wasn't necessarily like, I'm trying to be a thought leader for a conversation about the way vulva have it. No, it was just me, like, coming to terms with the things that I didn't learn. And also just thinking a little bit deeper about why I do and don't do certain things. And owning a vibrator was like, it's been like 8 years. Like in my head, I was like, who doesn't have a vibrator? But no, and I was meeting all these like barriers to conversation. Whereas like, it's not just a conversation about pleasure. It's about how entitled people think they are to pleasure, how much they're relying on another person to give them pleasure. Like it was interesting. And it was also like a nice social experiment for me because I was like, I wonder what it would take for somebody to feel more comfortable to have this discussion and then like have it be a snowball effect. Like what will it take for you to go to your friend group and have this discussion and not just feel as though my space is the safe space to talk about these things? And turns out very little. I mean, nothing is that radical in 2020. Get over yourself. Like, rub one out.
Yeah.
You'll be better for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think as well, like, in terms of, like, teaching, vagina havers about, like, owning your own body, I don't know, for me personally, I don't know, and why I think these conversations are so important, because I found just from being given permission to own my own body, it's not even about the act of making myself orgasm, it's more then trickles into, like, the way I move around in the world. Even with my identity, like, I feel like it was like a ripple effect from literally that conversation with Lucinda to now being like openly queer. I feel like it is all of the same. It's like a snowball effect.
Yeah. It all matters. Everything matters. Interconnectivity.
What are your thoughts on tokenistic activism and performative allyship?
I think it's completely necessary, but it falls into that category of being really self-serving and beneficial to the person who's performing it than the movement they're supporting. So in the sense that, let's talk about, for instance, like the Black Lives Matter movement, and in that 1 month in like August, where everyone's like, post the black tile if you really care about black people. And everyone's like, fuck yes, this is a great way to show that I'm aligned, that I'm socially woke. Like I was looking for this for ages and now I just post this and everybody knows. And I totally understand from the mind of someone who's like, I just want to show just in my small way that I'm doing the right thing and I'm presenting in the right way. And I get that. But then in the grand scheme of things, or in that situation in particular, people were using the hashtag to indicate that they were like woke, and the follow-on was that they were blocking the hashtag from all this really like important information about the movement and all these things that were happening to further the movement. That was getting truncated by people being like, but look at me, I'm doing the right thing. And so it's not to say that it's not worthwhile, because it did a great thing of making the conversation viral, and people who thought that it was, people who didn't understand what it meant or why it needed to happen or what the point is, was like, okay, I guess it makes sense. Like, they do matter, sick, you know? But in the grand scheme of things, like people who are actually activists, who are looking for, you know, people with helping hands to actually make change happen on like a legislative level, are like, what the, babes, like over here, you know? And we're like, no, we're doing this. Shh, I just did my post, okay, relax. But I think I'm gonna talk about like 20-somethings, because like, that's what I know. I don't know 30-somethings, I don't know in the 10s. Like, we know how things have been, and we have the imagination and the wisdom to know how good things can get. But I think a lot of us are so caught up in making sure that others know that we're on that right trajectory, that they're making sure that the actions that we do day to day are taking us to that place. A good example is like feminism, right? I think that a lot of people forget that it is like it's a journey to a destination of like getting to a better place, not just a self-identifier. I feel like people were like, finally, I've got a word that now correctly explains things I believe in a really palatable way. I'm like, yeah, no, I get that. But that's like, we've got to move towards somewhere. This is like an action-based activity. It's not just a way for people to know that you believe that people are all equal, babes. I also think with performative activism, it makes the presumption that if the entry point is simple and accessible, then people will naturally do the additional learning it takes to develop the thought, you know? So if your entry point into feminism is like pay gap, then from there you'll actually do the research and realize that conversation caters to a very certain demographic, it's not intersectional, and then, but it doesn't happen. So we just get stuck in like a performative activism circle jerk, and then everyone gets excited that we're surrounding ourselves with like-minded people. But in reality, it's this ambiguity that's very dangerous, because somebody telling you they're a feminist isn't what we like it to be. Yeah. As mentioned earlier, you have someone who's a feminist, but like also a TERF. So you're kind of like, but you said, and then they're kind of like, but, you know, like refugees, right? And you're like, what? Yeah. So it gets very dangerous, because we make presumptions about people's beliefs and characteristics based on these like vague phrases that don't really mean anything in the grand scheme of things. Like, yes, theoretically, of course, but in a practical sense, it doesn't tell us about what you believe and why you believe it and how far you'll go to make sure you further that belief system.
The t-shirt isn't enough.
It's not enough, but it's a good starting point. It's all a great starting point. I mean, it's because of performative activism that most of us even know about the shit that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. You know, we weren't hiding in activist circles and like absorbing things like sponges. We were waiting for someone to repost a really virtue signally tweet to their story so we could be like, fuck, we too believe that everybody deserves rights. What next? Am I a socialist? So.
Something a little bit more lighthearted. You have been referred to as the queen of manifesting. We kind of touched on earlier, sort of, with the glass half full.
Yeah.
Maybe. I would love to know what you think are some of the most misconceptions when it comes to manifesting and how people could maybe better manifest, or maybe what's going wrong in the conversation or right in the conversation.
I mean, the whole thing is one big misconception, and it's no surprise that the people who are the thought leaders of that conversation are naturally quite privileged people. Of course, you can like get things when you already have things. That's like the basis of like attracts like. If you already have money, it's easy to get more money, and like vice versa. I think that like people are missing the fundamental definition of the word. Like to manifest is just to attract things based on doing things. Right? So like it's if you do this, this will happen, but it's not as simple as if you want, you will get. I think that how I look at manifesting is like not even in a spiritual way, it's a very practical way, in the sense that if you were thinking very proactively about something that you want to do, I want to be a filmmaker. I don't, but let's use that as an example. Then if you are consistently thinking about wanting to be a filmmaker, you're watching films, you're writing down notes, you're telling people, you're engaging with the idea, then that means that hypothetically you are further along in that journey than if you knew it and didn't say anything about it, didn't research about it, didn't tell anyone about it, all of that. So it's like the roundabout idea that if you want something, the more you think about it, the more you'll indirectly act towards it, and then you'll be closer to getting it. That's it. You know, so like I feel like people, and it's definitely like the really exploitative, scammy culture that the internet encourages. They see this like how to get anything you want, and they go and tell people who are poor, who are differently able, that like just, you know, wake up tomorrow, walk yourself to the bank, write a check for $1 million, and you will get it because the universe works in your favor. It's like, no, babes, like that is damaging. Be mindful.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that manifestation as a tool is definitely something that people who identify with their self-privilege can use in their favor. I definitely don't think it's one of those things that you need in your arsenal to do things, but I think the theory behind it is what's more beneficial than the actual practice. But I do think it's very interesting to understand like the scientific principles behind the fact that once your mind gets set on a concept, it will start to look for that concept in different areas of life. Like when you see a yellow car and you're like, spotto, and then you see a ton of different yellow cars. It's just that suddenly your conscious and subconscious mind are working towards looking out for these very specific things. It wasn't placed there by a fairy for you. Or maybe it was. I think manifesting should be separated into like a spiritual practice and like a scientific fact-based practice to suit whoever's using it, right? It is what you'd like it to be. If it resonates, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And if you're a spiritual person, it might be in your best interest to think that if I pray and if I want and if I do what needs to be done in a spiritual sense, this thing will come to me. But somebody who's far more practically minded and maybe a skeptic probably needs to know that, you know, if your subconscious mind recognizes a thought loop, it'll put that on repeat in the back of your head, and subconsciously you find yourself doing things that you wouldn't have done otherwise before you started manifesting.
Well, we're gonna end with, what is one way you make the first move in your day-to-day life?
I fundamentally don't know when I've not made the first move. I'm a very pushy person. But probably it's like waking up with the belief that if like I really want to do something, then I have to make active steps to do it. And so I just wake up every day to do stuff.
Love it.
You know, if I want to paint, go get some paintbrushes, sis. If I want to learn how to plant some perennials,
do it.
Get some healthy soil, go to Bunnings.
And sing.
Beautiful music ensues.